Welcome to the Next Class 2.0 with host Rob Birdsell, Kent Hickey, and Aaron Barisano. Join us as we discuss the latest trends and innovations shaping education.
Hello and welcome to the Next Class. I'm Rob Birdsell, your co-host, joined as I am every other podcast by Kent Hickey. Kent, good to see you.
Good to see you, Rob. Good to see you, Kelby.
And I am excited to welcome our guest today, Kelby Woodard, the president and CEO of the Cristo Rey Network. Kelby, welcome to the Next Class.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
So I just, for our viewers, we have some people that view these podcasts. I am coming to you from the University of Minnesota, and I'm at the Graduate Hotel. It is amazing. Down in the lobby, there are kids studying all over. It's not the way a Friday afternoon would have been at Villanova in 1988, but it's fun to see them working down in the lobby. So Kelby, you have been CEO for a bit over a year now. Is that correct?
That's right. So it started in July of 2023.
Great. And your background is intriguing to me, and I think I'd like to start with that. So you began your career in security, I believe at Target Corporation. You were head of security for Target Corporation?
Yeah, it took a minute to get there. I didn't start as head of security at Target Corporation, but I ran the overseas security operations for Target. Yeah, that was my last job there. I started off actually on the sales floor of a Target store in Dallas, catching shoplifters. And in classic, you promote people who are incompetent. I only did that for about 3 weeks, and I got promoted out of that position. But that's how I started at Target.
And then you started your own firm, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. So when I left Target in 2005, me and another director from the Target Corporation started a couple of companies. One was a consulting company that was focused on getting product into and out of really tough areas like Pakistan or Guatemala. And then we also had the TurboTax of customs entries. So it was a software that allowed you to do your own customs entries. So that was a lot of fun.
And then a big pivot. So from corporate America, entrepreneur, to politics.
Right. So in 2010, was at breakfast with some friends. We had breakfast every Saturday morning in this little cafe in Belle Plaine, Minnesota, and they challenged me to run for office. So when your friends challenge you to do stuff, it's hard not to do it. Otherwise, you lose face. So I ran for state representative and served 2 terms in the Minnesota House, which really, and maybe this is your next question, but that's how I got involved with Cristo Rey, was as a result of my political career.
Well, let's pause for a minute, because I just find those two, business, corporate America, and entrepreneur combined with politics, just such an interesting skill set that you had coming to Cristo Rey, because you're running a business when you're running a Cristo Rey school. You're selling, you're doing corporate sales, corporate relations. But you're also politics, you're in the church. And so I've always been intrigued with your background, but let's go back to where you were. To tell us how you met Cristo Rey and how you came to Cristo Rey.
Yeah, before I get to that was very nice of you to say, because my mom just tells me I can't seem to hold a job. So that was I'm going to relay your thoughts to her. Maybe that will lay some of her fears.
We'll send her this podcast and
I'll send her the podcast. That's right. So in 2011, I was the chief author of the school choice bill in Minnesota. And some kids from Cristo Rey Twin Cities, Cristo Rey Jesuit Twin Cities, came and testified on behalf of my bill in the Education Finance Committee. I was my party's lead on education finance. And lo and behold, that day, we were late on the floor. We had a late floor session. So the students showed up about noon. And by the time we hit about 9 o'clock at night, I had to tell the students, look, I'm sorry, you guys are going to have to go home because we're not going to have this committee. They're going to cancel the committee. And they refused to go home. And they said, look, we want our voices heard. And so I grabbed the House videographer and we videoed their testimony and we showed it in committee the next day. And, regardless if you were a Republican or Democrat, there was not a dry eye on that committee. And the school choice bill passed the House, I think in part because of their stories, only to be vetoed by Governor Dayton. That's why you don't have a a school choice bill or a school choice law that's active in Minnesota today. But that's when I fell in love with Cristo Rey and their stories. And I remember going home and telling my wife that we have to figure out how we can get more involved in Cristo Rey. So we did a little bit of volunteering at Cristo Rey Jesuit Twin Cities. And when Cristo Rey decided to open a school in Dallas in 2013, I threw my hat in the ring. And when they offered me the job, I resigned my seat in the House and sold the companies we had started. And we moved back to where we're originally from, which is Dallas.
That's a pretty remarkable story, and credit to you and your wife Donna, who I've gotten to know, that you up and moved your family for Cristo Rey and to start a school, going back to your entrepreneurial background. So I'll turn it to you, Kent, now.
Yeah, maybe we'll shift over a little bit to Cristo Rey itself. That is a remarkable biography, Kelby. That's I knew some of that, but I didn't know all of it. It's what a remarkable history you had. And your mother, by the way, should be quite proud of you. I think you probably could hold of a job longer than the 3 weeks. Obviously, that Target one didn't go well at all, but but that's a great history. Well, and it's fitting with the great history of Cristo Rey. So, I think there's been no more important development in Catholic education in this country over the decades than Cristo Rey and the vision. It just has totally changed, I think, how we look at schools, and actually more needs to happen. But with now you're at the helm, right? And so how do you see Cristo Rey developing? What are your greatest challenges? I guess it's always like challenges, opportunities, right? But what are you seeing from your leadership role at Cristo Rey as being the trends that are going on right now?
So listen, it's always a challenge. Education is always a challenge. And so the academic piece of what we do, where the vast majority of our students who start Cristo Rey will start a couple of grade levels behind in math and literacy, and we put them through a very aggressive and rigorous college prep program, right? So that's always a challenge. That's the standing challenge. But the challenge of the moment is really around corporate work study. Because corporate work study is such an integral part of what a Cristo Rey school is. It's in its DNA, partially because it's a revenue source for schools where families are paying about $1,000 a year or less to attend the school. So tuition does not drive our revenue. Corporate work study is what allows us to operate our schools financially. But what we've discovered, of course, over time is that it means much more to our students and our families than just the financial sustainability of our schools. And post-COVID and now the emergence of AI has really changed the landscape for our students and the kinds of jobs that they do and the corporations that are willing to hire them to pay their tuition.
So if you had a crystal ball and you were looking 2 or 3 years out, how would you see that resolving itself, or does Cristo Rey have to do things differently? Does the model have to be tweaked in some way?
Well, it's always being tweaked, right? So yes, the direct answer to that is yes, it has to be tweaked. If I look, 3 to 5 years from now, I think what we would see is a much different focus from corporate work study. And here's what I mean. If you looked at us pre-COVID, the vast majority of our jobs were in the legal industry, the consulting, accounting industry, where you had big offices with lots of people, and we had students that, we would have 4 students share a job, freshmen on Mondays, sophomores on Tuesdays, juniors on Wednesdays, seniors on Thursdays, and then they would rotate the Friday. That model is rapidly disappearing. So what we would see 5 years from now is a much more entrepreneurial approach to our corporate work study program, where, for instance, I've asked some students in our school in Milwaukee to design a special award for somebody that's been here for 15 years. So walking through and having them design it in their innovation lab, using 3D printing, all those kinds of things, and we're going to pay them to do that. Mm-hmm. So the idea of having our students be able to be entrepreneurs in the marketplace means that 5 years from now, we may have a company that allows or that has students designing recognition for corporations across the country, right? And imagine having a student design a recognition for the CEO, outgoing CEO of a company. And as part of that, there's a QR code that they scan to say where the students are explaining why they designed it the way they did and how important they are to that organization, right? So it's just an example of the way our students are going to have to work in this new environment in order for corporate work study to remain relevant.
Could I just ask one just quick follow up on that? I love what you just said. And again, I think that's the beauty of Cristo Rey is it has to be, it's nimble because it has to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it shows the marketplace. So just a real quick question here, because I know Rob wants to get to another one, is it seems to me like what you're discussing crosses political lines or ideology, right? So and I probably shouldn't use these terms, but just if we talk about a person who was of a more liberal persuasion versus someone more conservative, for both of them in terms of the mission and approach, I would guess that in terms of financial support, it's just going to resonate with people across the board, and primarily because it's student-centered, right? But just what you described right there. So just in terms of fundraising, does this also generally resonate with people, that approach?
You know what? Absolutely, Ken. And I'll give you an example, right? So if you are of a political persuasion that students need to earn this and they need to be exposed to a capitalist system, right? A corporate system, so that they understand that they have a place in that system. That's what corporate work study is. If you believe that educational equity is really important and that students have been given a fair shot, we have that as well. So, I mean, there are many ways that people can look at this and say, that matches my values, right? And that's really a key for us in fundraising for our schools, because fundraising is still important for the schools, because we can connect with so many people on so many angles. And people really do, when they hear the story, and especially when they hear it directly from the students, it's a game changer.
And Kelby, you're just talking, that was really interesting about the entrepreneurial aspect. And you have a new board member, the president of DePaul University. Your sweatshirt there is talking about DePaul Cristo Rey in Columbus or Cincinnati?
Cincinnati. Yeah.
But DePaul University, the number 10 ranked School of Entrepreneurship, has a really interesting center there, the Coleman Center, where they every year get $3 million for the students to start businesses. And somebody endowed it, and it's just just resonated with me that it'd be great if the Cristo Rey students can continue to move in that direction for entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, thank you for mentioning that, because Rob Manuel is one of my favorite board members, in case he's listening. He is fantastic.
Well done, Kelby.
Yeah. And part of that, has led to an idea around raising money for an investment fund, right? So imagine this, you can raise a $1 million investment fund, and then you have a job team that learns that learns about investment strategy, that learns about what returns look like, right? Really financial services. And then whatever that $1 million throws off based on their investment advice, obviously with adult supervision here, is the job price, right? Is what goes back to pay their tuition. 1 year, if it's a regular 5% return, that's $50,000 that goes towards their tuition. That's fantastic. Other years, maybe a little bit less. But imagine you as a 14-year-old student coming out of Pleasant Grove in Dallas, and after 4 years at Cristo Rey Dallas, you have an understanding of what the investment community is like, and you have an idea of investment strategy, and you've made social connections with people who are powerful in that community. That's corporate work study 101 right there. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Well, on that same note, I mean, I love that idea of $1 million endowment for investments, but also, what if you had a $2 or $3 million endowment like DePaul, and your students got the 5%? They got to take that earnings and create a business.
Yeah. I think Kelby, I think Rob is actually making an offer at this point. I mean, I think he is your $1 million donor.
Now's the time to do it, Rob.
I was
Kid, if you can match it, that'd be great. We'll do a match right here.
I'm sorry, I have some audio problems. that just quick follow up on that, Rob, because that's a great line. I was talking to someone that we know well, John Ray, yesterday. One of the really great Catholic school administrators was out of Mater Dei in San Diego. But anyway, his line of business is financial planning, and he's looking at it, and he developed a really cool course apparently for kids on personal financial fitness. And when he brought that up to me, I was thinking, well, I used to hear that from parents a lot. Like, why don't you guys do more with that? So once again, whether it's managing an endowment, but it also ties into your own financial awareness, such as this, that would seem to transcend not only political, but also I'm sure that the supporters of Cristo Rey, a number of them are not Catholic, right? I mean, so this would be something that would resonate with folks from no religious background, a religious background, right? Is that the case at Cristo Rey, that you see broad support because of this entrepreneurial way that you have of looking at things?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's the college prep component of it, the work study component of it, and the fact that we are Catholic schools. That certainly broadens the perspective of, or the pool, right, of people who would be interested in supporting us. That's spot on. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're going to take a brief pause here to hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
Catholic Virtual is a proud sponsor of the Next Class 2.0 and dedicated to supporting Catholic school leaders. Our partner schools turn to us for online teaching solutions that fill teacher openings, expand their catalogs to offer more course choice, and provide options for students an alternative learning experience. Learn more about how we can support you at catholicvirtual.com.
Welcome back to the Next Class. I'm Rob Birdsell, joined by my co-host Kent Hickey and Kelby Woodard, the CEO of the Cristo Rey Network. So, Kelby, you've been in the seat for over a year now. I'm sure the honeymoon is over, and you have seen it all after a year. But what, after a year, has you most excited being the CEO of the Cristo Rey Network?
Well, listen, no surprise to the both of you. The thing that is the most inspiring, the most thrilling, is to visit the schools and talk to students. Mm-hmm. Right? Their stories are so incredible. And I have a particular interest in how they experience corporate work study, right? And so I'll spend a lot of time talking to them about artificial intelligence, as an example, and how AI has affected the way that they work, right? And what the jobs that they're doing. And it's interesting that Cristo Rey is kind of the canary in the coal mine here, where because of our students' access to the corporate world and the way the corporate world is approaching artificial intelligence, they're actually bringing that back to the academic space, right? Instead of the academic space bringing that to corporations. So our students have really rich experiences that are now starting to impact the way we look at our academic programs, right? Because of their experiences in work study. That for me is exciting.
Yeah.
Kelby, wow. Meeting the kids, being with them. How many, you have 30 schools. How many have you visited in your first year?
Yeah. So Rob, you, when you were around, we may have had 30 schools, but now we have 40.
Okay.
40
schools. How many of you visited?
Yeah. 30, 40.
Maybe. Yeah. Only difference of 10. 40 schools in 25 states. And in the first year, all right, so I'm gonna put a caveat here. I visited every school within the 6 months before I started and the year I was in position. Okay, right. So I have been on every school campus that we have.
That's pretty remarkable. When I was in your seat, the first job BJ Casson said was you have to get to every school in the first year, but there were only 12 back then. So it was a little easier.
That's one a month. You can make that.
Yes. So of those visits over the past 18 months, is there a story from a student that really stands out and resonates with you that speaks to what we've been talking about here today?
Yeah. So when I visited Cristo Rey Richmond, I was talking to a student there who works at a cancer center. And she was talking about the work she was doing. She was very proud of it. And she talked about how at one point she actually held cancer in her hand and how impactful that was to her. That the thing that they were working, the thing that they were battling, she could actually physically see in her hand. And a 17-year-old student from Cristo Rey Richmond is getting that kind of experience because of Cristo Rey. And that was just a really moving. There's so many moving stories, but that one really hit home for me because we've all experienced people who have suffered from or passed away from cancer, and she's on the cutting edge of figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
17-year-old kid.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the beauties of Cristo Rey is that it is countercultural in a very positive sense. So, my background is more in traditional Catholic schools, and I'd say the traditional way to look at funding would be you have your regular paying customers, and if you do well enough in fundraising and you do well enough with enrollment, then you take what is left of the pie that you can try to help those families who are in financial need, right? And of course, Cristo Rey, I would say, very much in tune with the Gospels, right? The early church just turns that on its head and says, no, our focus is on the students first who are in need, and then, to do that. So, once again, going back to the earlier comments, the foundation of Cristo Rey is so different and so important and so countercultural. I How do you see that, Kelby, that spirit continuing, particularly with students and their needs, their maybe mental health needs or what's going on, these kind of things. How do you see that continuing on with them? More students who can have that experience of holding on to cancer and being transformed by that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you that, over time, so almost 30 years now that Cristo Rey has been around, the organizations tend to lose sort of that mission, right? That zeal for what you're doing. Cristo Rey is counter to that as well. We recently, with the national team here, did a book club with More Than a Dream, which is a book about Father Foley and Father Gartland, and Rob Birdsell's in it, where that was the origin story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of new people here who haven't experienced that, right? And so our book club was each team would read 3 chapters and then report those 3 chapters back on what their reflections were about it. And it was such a special moment. We would do it every Monday because seeing new people in this mission kind of reconnect with why we're doing this in the first place, and some of the struggles that the original school, Cristo Rey Jesuit Pilsen, had, we still have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so sometimes you feel like no one's ever experienced this before. No one, this must be completely new and I'm the only one that can resolve this. And to kind of really make that connection to our origin and the people that made this so special in the very beginning is why this mission continues to be so special. And all that relates to, a growing understanding that it's not just about, a college prep curriculum and a corporate work study program in a Catholic school. It's about, to and through college. We recognize there's a lot more to this than just getting kids into college. We recognize that, especially in 2024, that our students have a lot more different experiences and traumas than they may have before, or at least different traumas and experiences that we have to be able to respond to and support. And probably the early days, they would have liked to have been able to do that, but they weren't able to. Now we are. So that's entirely part of what the mission is for Cristo Rey.
Just a quick follow-up to that, that the 3 of us and some others were fortunate to be on a call with a Benedictine monk a couple of weeks ago. And I recall him saying, and so this goes back, 1,500 years. But whenever there's a renewal within a religious order, it always starts with going back to the founding documents. That you kind of go along. This happens, I think, to anyone. It could happen to Sears, or it could happen to Amazon or or J.C. Penney, and but it can Kmart. Well, probably a better example right now. But it can happen to religious orders. And so for the Benedictines, when there's been renewal, it's always going back to the rule of Saint Benedict, or the Jesuits. The huge renewal that they had under Rupe, who's often considered, the second founders of the Jesuits. But a lot of that was going back to the founders, going back to Ignatius's documents. So it's really interesting to me that that's what you're doing right now for a pretty new. It's not. This is not an organization that's 1,500 years old, but
Yeah.
you're going back to founding documents, and that's got to help the culture, right? So that the people who are doing it now are saying, your footsteps you're making now. Let's look at some footsteps that led to this place. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting that you're doing that culturally, right?
And for us, it's really, really important at this moment in time. Because of the challenges we see with corporate work study, there could be a tendency to say it's no longer relevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
That because no one has ever experienced this moment in time, that the corporate work study program, our focus on college prep, all those things are just no longer relevant. And the reality is it has always been tough, and it's always been questioned. And people are always saying that, well, you can't do that. That's crazy. Look, we put 14-year-old kids in corporate environments, right? That's crazy.
Well,
And then not only that, then we ask them to pay for it, right? That's even crazy. But it works.
Yeah.
It's amazing. 40 schools, 25 states.
Well, Kelby, the famous story.
1,000 students.
The famous story from 60 Minutes when the first day and the kids went off to work and Father Foley, sat under his desk waiting for them to call and was so afraid they'd be like, "What are you doing?" And they did call, but they were saying, "Send more kids." So you're right. From the beginning, it was, as Kent was saying, is totally countercultural. This whole concept of sending 14-year-olds to downtown Chicago was kind of crazy. Two other thoughts on this train before we move to another subject, Kelby. Father Foley always said Cristo Rey attracts great people. And I think that's why this mission continues to thrive. I mean, when I go to your office, you've got great people. When I go to visit Preston Kendall in Waukegan, he's got great people. And they're attracted to this mission. And it's not easy to keep the mission going. But when you have a mission like you do, it attracts great people, and that does make it a bit easier. And I think you guys have also done a great job. Right next to you is Father Jim Gartland. He was the guy who walked the streets and did the first feasibility study. So having that history literally right next to you in your office is powerful. I just want to pivot for a few minutes here before we wrap up. AI, you've been mentioning a number of times, Kelby. It's all the rage in business and education. And at ILE, we have a board member who doesn't start a project without AI. At Amerigo, we have a board member that every night from 9 to 11 p.m., he just studies AI. He doesn't let his senior VPs come to him with a problem unless they've run it through AI. And it's wild, these stories you're hearing. And I'd just be interested what your thoughts are, what you guys are doing, what you're planning to do around AI.
Yeah. So it is, I'll go back to, I think corporate work study is the one that is kind of pushing us in this direction, right? Because we see it. It's what our students are experiencing in the corporate environment. I'll give you a couple of examples. I was in Oklahoma City recently, visiting Cristo Rey, Oklahoma City, and talking to one of the board members who also happens to be CEO of the nation's largest natural gas company. And he was talking about how much he loved Cristo Rey. He's got 2 job teams, 8 students working there. He has no idea what they're going to be doing, right? I mean, it's like our job has changed. Our corporate environment has changed so much. I don't know what these kids are going to be doing in the future. So we talked through AI and said, how is your company utilizing AI? And he said, well, I know a lot of people are talking about it. I don't really understand it. And I said, well, that's a great job for our kids, right? They can be AI Sherpas because they're not afraid of it. And so they can, they can help you understand what AI is. They can do a project within the company to find out how different people are using it. Because part of what we're finding, and I find it here in the office too, is that we're using it all the time and we're not sure how other people are using it, right? I was just talking to our chief advancement officer, Brendan Morris, who was really excited that she was able to find zip codes for 700 donors that were missing like that using AI. Traditionally, she would have had to go on back to the mailer, and the mailer would have taken 2 weeks and $1,000 or whatever to do it. And she was able to figure that out and was very excited about it. And we're starting to do showcases within the office and within our schools of where, a brown bag where people come and talk about how they're using AI, right?
Mhm.
Our students are so adept at this, with a little bit of training. And then I'll close that out. But
Yeah.
the other thing about it is, while they're not afraid of it, if we're not working with them on it, it's not just the technical pieces of it; it's the ethical pieces.
Mhm.
Mhm.
As Catholic schools, we have a obligation to help our kids walk through the ethical dilemmas that AI presents as well. And there's nobody better positioned to do that than Catholic schools. If we put our head in the sand and we're like, it's cheating and we want nothing to do with it, our students are going to fall off a cliff when they get to college, where it's all over the place and they're not going to know how to manage it and use it.
Let me add. Here's a thought for Cristo Rey: is just based on what you said. Is what if there were 10 to 12, a group of 10 to 12 students, excellent teachers, couple administrators, who got together to figure out a model AI program that schools, Cristo Rey schools, and other Catholic schools could rely upon, just for exactly what you're talking about. And the reason why I bring that up is, so years ago there was a lot of pressure on administrators regarding cell phones,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm one of those people that said, no, we're not going to allow cell phones around campus, and primarily it's for relational reasons. The whole
Mm-hmm.
idea is Catholic schools, it's all about connecting around tables, eyes meeting eyes while you're walking around. And sure enough, I think the world now has kind of caught up with that Catholic school vision. Most Catholic schools didn't give in to ubiquitous cell phones, just use them whenever the hell you want. And so now we see the world. Now the world's saying, "Oh yeah, it's not so great just to have cell phones all the time." Well, and a lot of people are like, "Well, yeah." Well, anyway, we kind of knew that. But I guess with AI, one of the things that I'm concerned about is just how the brain develops. Like sometimes maybe the best classrooms are still going to be pen and paper to do a synthesis, to do an analysis, even outlining, because it's hard and it focuses the brain to function. But of course, the best classrooms are also going to be incorporating AI. Well, how do we do that? It just strikes me that maybe Cristo Rey may be the place that comes up with a model approach, pedagogical approach to AI, and that your students would be part of that, doing that.
Yeah.
Again, that's another way that you help shape the culture of Catholic schools, because it's not really happening in a lot of places. That's just a
Yeah.
thought there. So,
Well, you're placing a lot on our shoulders, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that on Tuesday. I'm busy on Monday, but on Tuesday I'll get right on it. No, it's a fantastic idea. And you've heard this analogy, but I think it's a lot like the use of calculators, right? And this is really just on the very basic ChatGPT use of AI. There's so many other ways that AI is changing the workplace, but it's like a calculator, right? You got to learn math first before you use the calculator. But once you've learned math, the basics of math, and then use a calculator, now you're into advanced math, right? ChatGPT and systems like that, they're not just about writing, right? They're about data analysis. I was walking through with one of the members of our data team yesterday. He and I think, were the only ones in the office. Everybody else was traveling. And we just kept ping-ponging back and forth. What if we looked at this? What if we, looked at our admissions or our recruitment numbers in this particular zip code and said, instead of 100% of the poverty rate, we expanded the pool to 200% of the poverty rate. How many kids are in that pool? Automatically, we could just keep going down this line of thinking. So it can be used really to help with critical thinking. It's about how you ask the questions that you need. And instead of then going to the library and looking up data that's 20 years old, you actually have real-time interaction that allows you to start thinking differently. And I think that's the hope of it. But there's a lot of that, trust me, there's a lot of bad around it, which is again why Catholic schools are going to play such a critical role in ensuring the ethical use, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to our last question, for our listeners that want to learn more about Cristo Rey, the website is www.Cristo Rey Network. That's CRISTOREY Network, NETWORK.org, CristoReyNetwork.org. You can learn about this movement, as Kent said, the most exciting thing in Catholic education in decades. And Kelby, congratulations on your first year, but we ask every guest one final question, and that is, who was your greatest teacher and why?
Yeah, undoubtedly, Mr. Donahue, who, when I was a junior at Jesuit Dallas, was a former drill sergeant. And the first semester of our AP history class, I won't mention his name, but we were really hard on a brand new teacher to the point he quit.
Mm.
And so I'm sure there's a couple of days in purgatory for my participation in that. But then, lo and behold, second semester, they bring in former drill sergeant Donahue, Fred Donahue. And we thought, here we go, next victim. And he set us straight in about 2 days and was just a fantastic AP history teacher. Really had us look critically and thinking critically. And one of the things he said in the very beginning was, all right, what is the one thing in your history books from all of your educational experience that you don't feel like we've ever addressed? And this is in the 80s. And we said, we never get to Vietnam. So we spent an entire semester talking about Vietnam and doing a deep dive into the Vietnam War that I still remember to this day. More facts about the Vietnam War and more about why it happened and how it ended than I probably should.
Mhm.
But Fred Donahue, who still teaches at Jesuit Dallas, is a
Awesome.
teacher, and had the opportunity, and then I'll end this, to teach two of my sons who ended up at Jesuit Dallas as well. And he ended up being their favorite teacher too. I'm sure I influenced a little bit of that. But Fred Donahue.
Well, you'll have to
That's
send
awesome.
this to him. He will probably appreciate that. Well, Kelby, it's been great being with you. I look forward to being with you out at Lone Rock in a couple weeks. Get your readings done. And to all of our listeners, there it is.
Highly.
Thank you for joining us today and the next class. We look forward to seeing you the next time. If you enjoyed this, please like it, share it, send it to your family and friends. And Kelby, thank you once again. Kent, good to be with you.
Yeah, you
Thanks,
as well,
Rob.
Rob.
Thanks,
Thanks, Kelby. God bless. Take care, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in.